Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. This is still going on, huh? Jesus.
Following the news, which you probably...
Preemptive Like Eyes, Warfront, Simon Whistler. Original link top of the description. My name's Connor if you're new. America is serious about annexing Greenland. I had to double check that this is a new video because I was like, this has got to be about months ago. But apparently it's still a thing, which, great. Let's go.
Probably haven't because you watch this channel. If you've only been vaguely following the news, which you probably haven't because you watch this channel, you might be under the impression that the story had died down, but it was just another of those things that Trump sometimes says that generate a couple of weeks worth of headlines and then just seem to disappear entirely, and we all forget about them. After all, I mean, no one has mentioned the annexation of Greenland for a little bit of a while now. After a flurry of comments in January and then again in the spring, when Trump refused to rule out taking the autonomous Danish territory by force, things seem to have gone quiet on that front, overshadowed by events in the Middle East and indeed our home in America. Until now, that is. It turns out that this relative quiet may have been a way to divert attention from what was really going on. A coordinated, US-backed influence campaign aimed at driving the vast, sparsely populated land into Uncle Sam's star-spangled arms.
So they're going the more indirect route.
At least those are the allegations.
Or where we are, I guess.
Aired this week by Danish broadcaster DR. Speaking to sources in the Danish Police Intelligence Service, or PET, the channel reported that, quote, it's PET's assessment that Greenland, especially in the current situation, is a target for influence campaigns of various kinds. As to what those influence campaigns may be, well, they center around 3 unidentified American citizens who have been active on the island in recent months. According to the broadcaster, the 3 are all connected to the current administration and have close personal ties to Donald Trump. As DR describes one of them, the American man, who has been seen in public with the US president many times, has recently been appointed to a role that could give him influence over US security policy. In its lead, the broadcaster described how the man had apparently spent time compiling a list of names of Greenlanders who support the idea of America annexing the island. Rather more chillingly, he also compiled a list of names of Greenlanders who are, quote, opponents of Donald Trump. Because nothing says we have benign intentions toward your island quite like having a list of enemies drawn up. To be 100% clear at this point, we have as yet no evidence that these Americans were working on orders from the president. The broadcaster itself states that, quote, DR has not been able to clarify whether the American men are working on their own initiative or under orders. Indeed, the White House's position since the story broke has been that these are 3 private citizens enjoying their constitutional right to free speech. The official US line, as quoted by the BBC, was simple, quote, we think the Danes need to calm down. If that's the case, and it really is just 3 motor mouths acting out their childhood fantasies of being spies, then there's nothing to see here, is there? It's just an example of a jittery European nation overreacting to some comments Trump once made that were never meant to be taken seriously. But we think there could be more to it than that. And we're not the only ones. The Danish government summoned America's highest-ranking diplomat in the country to complain after the reports broke. Back in June, Emmanuel Macron, the leader of one of the only significant military powers in Europe, pointedly visited the island, saying that Greenland was not to be sold, a move widely interpreted as a warning shot at Trump. So, clearly, there are people who think the current administration is deadly serious about annexing the island, all of which raises a couple of questions. What evidence do we have that Trump wants Greenland? Why would he want this frozen, sparsely populated island? And how might he go about getting?
Why would anyone want this? Enormous minerals and natural resources. Not a very small population, which means you don't have to go around as much to get clearance for what you want to do if you own it. And it's close to the Arctic, which is insanely important for 2 big reasons. One, it's crucial for, it would be a giant defense against Russian or anyone trying to send missiles, because if you do so, the fastest way is to go over the Arctic, and then you have to go through either Canada or Greenland or both. And the other reason is that the Arctic is melting, is getting less and less, more and more ice-free. And so it's going to be vital for trading. So those are two big reasons.
It. The first question is real easy to answer. Our evidence that Trump wants Greenland is the way that he keeps on saying that he wants Greenland. Here is a quote from March.
But we need it really for international world security. And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
I'm sorry, is that funny?
That here he is in July.
Yeah, the laughing was more unsettling than the words.
Doing an interview in which he refused to rule out taking it
One way or the other. War, maybe. Ha ha ha.
by force. We need Greenland very badly. Greenland is a very small amount of people which we'll take care of and will cherish them and all of that. But we need that for international security. And those are just two quotes, but do a quick Google search and you will
Notice the international security, right? You're trying to play it off as like something that would be good for the world.
find oh so many more.
We're talking about international security.
You'll also find things like the Wall Street Journal's bombshell story in May that America's spy agencies had been given a collection emphasis message directing them to step up intelligence gathering efforts on the island. You might also find additional reporting from around that time that Trump officials were mulling offering Greenland a compact of free association, or COFA, that would pull the country into America's orbit by offering it a similar deal to that held by Pacific Island nations like the Marshall Islands and Palau. So we can probably all agree that Trump is interested in Greenland, an interest that stretches all the way back to his offer to buy it in 2019. But that doesn't answer the bigger question. We all agree that Trump is interested in Greenland, an interest that stretches all the way back to his offer to buy it in 2019.
I didn't realize that he was talking about Greenland and wanting it in his first presidency. I thought this was a new thing in his second presidency. I guess I should have known that.
But that doesn't answer the bigger question. Why does he want it?
Well,
An
that's
autonomous part of the kingdom of...
yeah. That to me is the only obvious part of why the USA would want it. Doesn't mean they deserve it. Of course they don't. It's not theirs. But yeah, for military defense against missile attacks and optimal position in the Arctic.
Denmark, Greenland is home to a mere 57,000 people who rely on massive Danish subsidies to keep their government afloat. It has inclement weather, a tiny economy, and very little infrastructure. Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, it's home to a wealth of historic sites from the Viking era, but the current president is famously not animated by his love of natural beauty. Well, you know what else Greenland has, locked away deep beneath its thawing surface? Critical minerals. Vast deposits of the sort of minerals needed for modern high-tech and military kit, the sort of stuff the US deems vital for its national security. Not only that, but the US Geological Survey believes there may be vast fields of natural gas and 17.5 billion barrels of oil ready for extraction off of the nation's coast.
Yeah, this is something that any country on Earth could say about any territory on Earth that doesn't belong to them, is that we want this, it's critical to our national security, and we want it because there's stuff there that we want. Any country could say that. The point is, why should you get it, you know?
And then there's the security dimension. As the Arctic warms and competition increases in the once frozen seas of the North, important new shipping routes are going to open to adversaries like Russia and China. Whoever holds Greenland is going to dominate those routes. In other words, there's a
I think Canada will still dominate those routes, regardless of who owns Greenland. Maybe if Russia owns Greenland, then with Russia's extensive Arctic coastline and Greenland, then that might push them ahead of Canada, maybe?
hard-nosed, realpolitik argument for US annexation of Greenland. Or at least there would be, were it not for the agreements already in place that allow America almost unhindered access to the island for military means. But we'll get to those in just a moment. For now, let's try and answer our final question. How might the US go about acquiring the island? Well, buying it direct, that's out, as the Danes say no, and regardless, they don't even have authority to take the money. Nor does anyone think we're going to see a full-blown military invasion. The Danish intelligence sources that spoke to DR specifically ruled it out, and it's hard to see how Trump would win domestic backing for such a move. I mean, how many Americans would really support invading a peaceful country that has never done the US any harm? Luckily for the White House, there's another tactic they can try, one that Danish intelligence labeled as creating discord in the relationship between Greenland and Denmark. And frankly, that is an incredibly easy thing to do. Quick history lesson here. Prior to gaining autonomy following a referendum in 1979, Greenland had spent a long time as a Danish colony. During that time, the Danish crown didn't exactly cover itself in glory. One of the most controversial cases came about in the 1960s when about 4,500 Greenlandic women were fitted with contraceptive coils without their consent in an effort to stop them reproducing. 1960s, everybody. At other times, local children were relocated into Danish homes in an effort to erase their language and culture. No, this wasn't exactly unique at the time. Canada was undertaking a similar program of removing children from their cultures, and the USA has thought
This is a scary thing that a lot of countries have done and have done in the past, but not sneakily. I've said this kind of horrible truth that I see in how do you, when you gain territory, how do you secure it? Well, the best way that I've seen in history is to annihilate the population as much as possible that is already there, force them to assimilate somehow, push them into reservations or something, and move your people into the land, right? That's the most effective way. That's how the USA did it. That's how Canada did it. That's how Russia did it. That's how China did it. China's sort of still doing it. A lot of countries do that. And it's horrifically the most proven successful way. And so as you get further into the 20th century, you can't be that all out, just go and genocide people, you know? Well, and so you have to do it by other means. And forced sterilization is one of those means, and it's been done, not just by Denmark. It's one of those horrifying elephant in the room that it's not so much that countries have changed their ambitions compared to the past, but they've had to change the ways that they get there, because you can't just be out there doing horrible things for everyone to see, you know?
Forcibly sterilize.
Yeah, you guys get what I'm saying? This is a fascinating thing for me. If you disagree, let me know. Or if you have anything else to say, we'd love to see it in the comments.
A similar program of removing children from their cultures, and the USA is thought to have forcibly sterilized 100,000 women, mostly Native American and black, over the 20th century.
Yep.
Just because this was common doesn't mean it was excusable. The sterilizations remain a source of white-hot anger in Greenland, with a movement underway to have them officially recognized as a genocide. There's also festering resentment at the way Denmark has long treated Greenlanders as if they were children incapable of making their own choices. And it seems the current US influence operations, if that is indeed what they are, aim to tap into that anger. DR reports that one of the American men was discussing similar historical cases with Greenlanders that could be used, quote, to put Denmark in a bad light in American media. The likely reason? Greenland's Self-Government Act of 2009, an act that gave
Is America sure wants to open that can of worms? Because then you're going to be pointed at for your forced sterilizations.
Control over its own affairs except foreign policy and defense. An act that allowed Greenland to declare full independence at any point in the future, provided it is backed by a majority of citizens in a referendum. If there is a game plan here, it seems to be to use these real, historical crimes perpetrated by Copenhagen as a wedge issue to ensure Greenland holds a referendum and votes for independence. Step 2 would presumably then be to make the independent Greenlanders an offer they can't refuse. And that would, of course, be for their economically underdeveloped nation to join the USA with all the benefits that would bring. there's just a tiny snag here. It seems Greenlanders, as a whole, just aren't that into Uncle Sam. In one of the most recent polls of the independence issue, a majority said they wanted to fully separate from Denmark at some point in the future, but a mere 6% said they wanted to be a part of the United States. That's barely 3,400 people, and while Americans might assume anyone would want to join their country, the suspicion is that the Greenlanders would simply be trading one overlord for another. Only this time, the deal might be worse than what they had before. Right now, Greenlanders are Danish citizens, which mean they have the right to live and work all over the European Union. But Greenland itself isn't in the EU, which means that while, say, a Greenlander can move to Germany at any time for any reason, a German would need a work permit and a visa to move to Greenland. Perhaps more importantly, Greenlanders are also entitled to everything a regular Dane is. That means one of the most generous welfare states on the planet, with great healthcare, hefty pensions, childcare, free tuition, and all the other things that make most of the world envious of Northern Europe. As such, it's hard to imagine trading in a life of well-designed furniture and free healthcare for one of big-ass trucks and a broken health insurance system. Now, of course, if you're analyzing this through the lens of realpolitik, you might argue that this doesn't matter. What matters is the need for America to control the island and its resources, and everything else is just kind of window dressing.
I hate the term realpolitik. I hate that term. To me, it means that you're psychotic or you're stupid if you go into realpolitik and saying none of that matters, you can take it, just take it. But then you need to know that there are repercussions that will come with that. And then that means that it's no longer realpolitik because you're thinking about repercussions. And so realpolitik just doesn't mean anything. It essentially means screw the consequences, just go and get it. And if that's what it means, then fine. But, okay.
But even this perspective does run into some problems. One is the apparent military agreement that we mentioned earlier, which already allows America to turn Greenland into a snow-encrusted porcupine that will deter Russia and China in the Arctic. Since 1951, Washington has been allowed to build bases and deploy troops on Greenland as it sees fit. In the mid-20th century, that meant 17 bases or military installations with thousands of troops. Although the US currently maintains only a single base, Petafic, that's a choice made in Washington, and one that could absolutely be reversed. As for resource extraction, it's true that in the 2010s, Nuuk tried to make itself an attractive place for Chinese mining companies to invest in, but Beijing ran into the same problems everyone else does in Greenland. The weather's really bad, and there's not really any infrastructure, and that makes mining really, really difficult. On top of that, Greenland ultimately bowed to US pressure in order to restrict Chinese influence. All of this is why many thought the talk of annexing Greenland had died down. The downsides, they just seemed so vastly to outweigh the potential benefits that it just didn't seem to be worth doing. Remember, Denmark, up until recently, was one of the most pro-American countries on the planet. The goodwill remains such that even this year, the Danish parliament passed a law allowing US troops unhindered access to its own military bases whenever the White House sees fit. But now, the constant annexation talk threatens to blow this once strong relationship apart. A poll conducted earlier this year showed Danes now believe the US is a bigger threat than Iran or North Korea. The former Danish prime.
I thought they were going to say Russia as well, which that would, I mean, the other two are still horrifying to think that so many Danes think that way, but still, I was...
Minister and former head of NATO, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, told the Financial Times, quote, "The scary thing about..."
And honestly, maybe the USA is a bigger threat to Denmark than Russia is. Not to Europe, maybe. But because Russia... Well, maybe Russia does want to go after Greenland, but they're not as vocal about it as the USA.
Trump's rhetoric
is not a great thing to
told
think.
The Financial Times, quote, "The scary thing about Trump's rhetoric is that it's very similar to the rhetoric of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping."
Yeah, that's the big that's the big other side of the coin, of the realpolitik side of the coin, is that if we look at this as like a no morality, no whatever, just you can take Greenland militarily. And if you think that, but if you take Greenland, then you will have no case to be any different than China or than Russia, right? China in the South China Sea, or with Taiwan, or whatever, Russia with Ukraine, and so you'll lose that card of doing that. And you'll anger a lot of alliances, which will have economic, government, geopolitical consequences, is taking Greenland and the natural resources and all the benefit that comes with having Greenland overweigh that stuff. I would say the answer is no. So,
end quote. Yet for all the damage it seems likely to do, the signs remain that the White House may be serious about taking control of Greenland. To go back to DR's reporting, Danish intelligence has apparently assessed that we're in phase 3 of a 3-prong approach. First came flattery toward the Greenlanders, typified by things like Donnie Jr. visiting the island in January. Then came pressure on Denmark, such as when J.D. Vance travelled to Patuffik to make a speech criticising Copenhagen and urging Greenland to cut ties. Now we're in a quieter stage of the infiltration and influence campaigns, in which the administration tries to swing Greenlanders toward the idea of joining the United States. As for what comes next, unfortunately we can't say. We're just YouTubers after all, we're not magical wizards who can see into the future.
You're a wizard, Simon.
Yet. But what we can say is that it seems this story definitely isn't over, that there are at least elements within the current US government that are determined to do to Greenland what Vladimir Putin did to Crimea or Xi Jinping hopes to do to Taiwan. How successful they're going to be? We'll just have to wait and see.
Another difference between Russia, China, and the USA is that Russia was already, it didn't have the higher reputation that America had. Not that a lot of people didn't hate and still hate America in many ways, or that China has. In like, they don't have that same, like, you have to be high up in the world order and friendship in Europe to fall. And if China and Russia aren't already up there, then they have much less to lose if they invade Taiwan or invade Ukraine, right? The USA has a lot of clout on the world stage and in Europe, and so they have much more to lose, especially with a direct conflict with the European country's territory. So that's a big difference. And so this is crazy that this is still going on. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say, that I say anything that you disagree with, you think is stupid. Call me out. Would love to see it. Answering any of my questions I had. You guys are always awesome with that. Love y'all. And hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning together. Bye, guys.